Welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Nicolle Hodges. So Nicolle is actually a returning guest, and Nicolle's a journalist. So Nicolle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So speaking of journalism, and I know that you have a very busy life, and you were just in Miami, and I think you were there for a ketamine conference, correct?
Yeah, so ketamine was part of it. I was there on behalf of the Dales Report team, and Microdose is the largest psychedelic medicine conference in the world, and it was our first time for many to meet in person. So that awkward moment where a Twitter handle that you've been following for a long time suddenly turns into a tipsy CEO at an after party telling you all their secrets. So it's just, fantastic fodder. But yeah, I was out there moderating a panel on ketamine. So that included the CEO of Braxia, Roger McIntyre, who's a leading researcher in ketamine. Lamar Odom was supposed to be part of that, but he had some technical difficulties and he was quarantined. So I'm actually interviewing him a little later today. But Zappy Zappalin was there, and he was part of creating the documentary Lamar Odom Reborn, which essentially goes through Lamar's journey in transitioning from a hyper depressive state and then going through ketamine treatment and kind of coming out the other side and what that was like for him. And then Dr. Michelle Weiner, who specializes in pain management and where ketamine can actually help us reconnect and feel a zest for life again. So making sure that the conversation around ketamine treatment isn't just mental health, but also physical health. So I moderated that, and then I spoke on a panel about sex and psychedelics.
Very cool. So ketamine is, part of the reason why I want to chat again with you today. I've been prescribing ketamine now for a couple and a half years. Lucky enough to be published for it twice, just because some of my patients responded to it so well. And, one thing that I will say before I ask you some questions, Nicolle, is that ketamine can be used as a monotherapy, meaning that you don't necessarily have to have a trained therapist there with you to benefit from the treatment. I have, literally hundreds of patients who, just use it on their own, and they get very good results, and it can be used for so many different things. So, if you look up on the internet, the big thing you'll probably see is treatment-resistant depression. But I'm also really happy, though, too, that you said, physical health, because it actually is really effective for chronic pain. And, as you know, and as most people know, like if you're in chronic pain, your chances of having mental health disorder, particularly depression, just go through the roof. Because, it's frustrating to live with pain all the time. So, ketamine is fantastic in that regard. And then, I've had some really good results with some therapists as well. So, I share patients with a lot of therapists in London and in Toronto, and we do some ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and we find it to be very effective for our patients. But I do want to chat with you a little bit about the Lamar Odom thing. I actually don't know too much about that. So I'm a Lakers fan. I like Lamar Odom. He was probably I guess the third best player on that team when they won back-to-back championships. Well, it's not better than Kobe and Gasol, right? So
I'll let him know you said that when I speak to him later. I'll give him her Twitter handle. You can stand a few more haters, right? At this point, you're used to it.
I'm used to it. I can have a few more. Hopefully Lamar doesn't get too upset at me for that one. I think he knows he's not as good as Kobe and Gasol, but it's all good. But can you tell me a little bit more about Lamar? Because I know he has gone through these treatments. I know he was kind of in a depressive state. So, I don't think a lot of people know about him. I don't know about him. So if you kind of walk us through that story and how ketamine helped him, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll speak on a couple of things that you mentioned, which I think for people that don't suffer from chronic pain, it's almost hard to wrap your mind around like how it can throw you into such depression. But I almost equate it, again, like the spectrum here is on the very light end, but when you have a cold and your nose is constantly running, or you just like can't think properly because you just feel like you have this weight at the front of your forehead, and all of a sudden you're just super aware of your nose, and you go through your whole day aware of your nose, where when you're in a healthy state, your regular functions like breathing, you're not aware of. But when you are dealing with something that's outside of your normal faculty, all of a sudden the mental real estate that it takes up where something can no longer live there is is taken up by an annoyance. And so it's almost like you just have this constant nagging annoyance. And when you have a runny nose, that's one thing. But when you have something like, I mean, God, anything like what, like name something that one of your patients with chronic pain is
just
dealing
like
with.
a lower back pain, even if you
Yeah.
just strain yourself, and like, yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I've luckily, I've never had any serious injuries, but I've had some nagging injuries, and most people have. And I kind of messed up my back a little bit in March for about a month, and for sure it affected my mood, especially the first couple of days. It was
Well, you
so
just kind of
annoying.
feel like less of a person, right? You just feel less
Yeah.
capable. And it's like you're a constant reminder that you're not living an optimal life. So then when something comes in and it's something like ketamine, even people that are resistant to these kind of, let's call them, healing modalities, they're at their wits end and they're saying like, please just give me something to make this pain go away. And so I do think what Dr. Michelle Weiner brought up was really important. And we are talking a lot about mental health, especially in relation to psychedelics. We're talking a lot about psychedelic assisted therapy, and I think that's really important. But I agree with her when she said that physical health also needs to really be part of the discussions that we're having as to why psychedelics should be moved forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I know that a lot of people have responded pretty well to psilocybin as well in terms of an anti-inflammatory, and that has other treatments beyond just mental health as well. So yeah, I fully agree with you that when it comes to ketamine, I know all the buzz these days seems to be around mental health, but it can absolutely be incredibly effective for your physical health, particularly for chronic pain as well.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I find that it's most effective, like when the medication is in your system. Whereas sometimes that's sort of, I guess, a difference I find with chronic pain and mental health is that sometimes with ketamine, you can just do it, not necessarily once or twice. You might have to do it a lot more than that, but you can do it a few times and then you're kind of good for a few days. It just kind of gets you back on track and your head's back in a good space. But for the chronic pain component, like I do have just a couple patients now that they're taking a little bit of ketamine every single day,
Yeah.
a couple of times a day, just because they find that that's what's most effective, for their pain. And part of that too, does relate to cannabis a little bit, just because like when people say, like I describe ketamine as a dissociative drug, like
Yes.
it's very hard to like describe. It's like when someone says, it's like someone saying to you like, what is feeling drunk like, or what is feeling high like it's so
Like an
hard to
asshole. When you're
like
drunk, you're
yeah,
an asshole.
yeah, pretty
How
much.
does it feel to
But
be an asshole?
probably have too much confidence
Yeah.
when you're an
Yeah.
asshole.
And
Probably
and
say
what
things
there's
that are way too appropriate,
exactly,
you know.
someone says something funny about cocaine as well. It's oh, tomorrow's confidence today.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So ketamine, fortunately doesn't make you an asshole at all. It kind of makes you more or less, a nicer person
Yeah, it's a
from the start.
dissociative sensation in the sense of like people describe it as, going into a dream state and experiencing a sense of euphoria or wonder, calm, peacefulness,
Stillness, yeah,
stillness. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And some people just need that break,
yeah.
like you were saying, like I think that I think that's a really good point. You were saying, like, when you brought up the cold, and like your mind is just on your nose all day, you know what I mean? Like you just can't help it, right? And because of that, it breaks your focus, and because it breaks your focus, you're unable to be productive. And in reality, the only thing that really makes us happy is when we're making progress. And if your chronic pain is impeding you from making progress in various different areas of your life, then basically you're just going to feel like shit, and you're still going to be depressed. So eliminating that chronic pain is definitely a really good initiating factor to improving your overall mental health.
Yeah, and like some of the, and I trust me, I will get to the Lamar stuff in a bit, but some of the things that came up at the conference too were then talking about efficacy and delivery methods, right? And so, does ketamine need to be administered through an IV for it to have best results, which then ties it more or less to a clinical setting,
Mhm.
versus you have companies like Mindbloom, for instance, which launched in 2018, that is doing at home ketamine kits. And so then you have someone on stage like Dr. Roger McIntyre, and, you're asking him, okay, well, if access is important and at-home ketamine treatments or kits provide more access because it reduces the cost, and sometimes we're talking about a cost reduction of like upwards of $400, $600, $1,500 down to somewhere more in the $200 range, where you have, telehealth opportunities such as having a psychedelic guide, on your computer while you administer ketamine. Like, what is the better route, or can they both exist and just become advantageous in and of themselves?
I'm so happy you brought that up, actually, because I prescribe ketamine, like I said, just as a monotherapy on its own and with therapists. But when I prescribe it, and I'm not, trying to make me out like Mother Teresa or anything, but like I don't charge my patients anything. Like they just see me as an open visit, and then they have to pay for the medication. But the medication, it's fairly inexpensive. Like it might be $3 or $4 for a tablet. So I mean, you're really, and then if you go to a therapist, and again, I understand that, therapists aren't covered under OHIP, like when someone comes to me, but they are charging $225, maybe $300. It could be even more an hour for one of those sessions. And unfortunately, a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people who are depressed are have a fairly low income, and they can't afford that. So, it's wonderful that we have the evidence that ketamine assisted psychotherapy works, but, what are we going to do for people who can't afford to see a therapist and who can't afford to potentially go to one of these IV clinics? And just coming back to what you said about the IV. So the way that I prescribe ketamine, I'm a family doc. I'm not an anesthetist. I don't work in a hospital. So, my patients are prescribed ketamine through a capsule, and then it is very difficult the absorption of that is very poor overall. So if they take it early in the morning on an empty stomach, it's a complete game changer. If you take it early morning, empty stomach, or, whenever you do have an empty stomach, if you're doing intermittent fasting, whatever, it can be later in the day. But as long as you have an empty stomach, you will get pretty significant results. And, obviously you can increase the dose as well. So, for some people, I prescribed, 75 milligrams. It hasn't really, done too much for them. So oftentimes I'll bump it up to 150. Now, I usually don't go beyond 150 unless they're with their therapist, just because it is good to have, someone who's professional who's there if you're using a higher dose. But, you can get really good results, again, just with using capsules of ketamine, as long as you are using it on an empty stomach. My patients have gotten excellent results, and they're very satisfied with the treatment overall.
Mm-hmm. Talking about, or at least comparing the difference between an at-home model versus the clinical model, you're completely right. It has to be taken into consideration, not just access financially, but access physically, right? There are people who just won't be able to get
Go to the
up
clinic
and get there, and either
Yeah.
that's because of a physical ailment, or the wet blanket of depression that makes it so getting out of bed is like a monumental quest. And
Yeah.
then you actually think about all the people that you have to interact with on your way from point A to point B, and it just doesn't seem worth it, because of course it's easier to stay in bed, even though it's the complete opposite of what would actually be helpful. So, being able to roll over and fire up your laptop. And, one thing that COVID has shown us is how these pivotal adjustments can be made if absolutely necessary. Like telehealth, I think, should start to see a surge in interest and funding, because we're no longer limited to location. And I think that's important. I think it's really important, especially in this context. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking to Lamar about, and what he talks about in the documentary as well, is that he's continuing to do ketamine treatments from the comfort of his own home. It's his experience with ketamine, and again, like, he wasn't able to be at Wonderland, he wasn't present, but Zappy, who identifies as a psychedelic concierge to the stars, which I asked him to explain that moniker, and essentially is he's a psychedelic guide, and he guides, celebrities and high profile people and athletes. And he was with Lamar from the beginning to the end. And Lamar's experience with ketamine was his first time using a psychedelic ever in his life. And this was, again, a person who had come to the end of their own mental rope. And can you hear my cat? He's meowing a lot.
I
You
can't hear
can?
your
Okay,
cat.
good. Okay, good. Um,
Thanks for checking though.
yeah,
Appreciate
just making sure there wasn't just like this mewing soundtrack in the background as I'm trying to talk. But so like, what does it mean to reach the end of your rope? And I think something that's really come up is, you see all these headlines: I was paralyzed by depression, and then came ketamine. And I think one of the ones that I'm hearing the most, that's having the most impact, is coming a lot from athletes, which is suicidal ideations. We talk about
Yes.
having a runny nose, and we talk, like, we talk about the fact that, from a physical point, like, maybe these chronic pains are kind of like walking around all day with bad shoes. Could you imagine walking around all day with a bad mind? A mind that is insisting that you kill yourself at every opportunity. I mean, we're constantly surrounded by death, right? Like, we're wired to avoid it at all costs. I mean, we are constantly in the trust of others. We get into a car and we're driving, we just assume everyone's going to try not to kill you. But when you are a liability to yourself, everything becomes a threat, and you're just fending off your own mind. And you have these athletes who are at the height of their careers, and they're looked at as these heroes. And not only that, but then they undergo, massive stress to their bodies, but specifically their brains. And we're seeing a lot of information coming out around severe brain trauma and like what that can actually do, in terms of anything ranging from dizziness and headaches to wanting to kill yourself or becoming incredibly aggressive and violent. And it's like, it's the farthest fall from grace that you can possibly imagine. And the worst part is, and especially in context to high level athletes and high level athletes as men, which is a double whammy, but this hero complex that you want to maintain then makes you less likely to actually talk about the pain that you're going through.
Yeah.
So you have someone like, ex, what is it, NHLer Dan Carcillo, who
He's
now
been
runs
on
a
the
company called
podcast.
Wasana, right? Yeah. And he's sitting on stage saying, yep, I wanted to kill myself. You know how important it is for men and for other
Yeah.
athletes to hear somebody like that talk about it and then talk about how ketamine helped him. So you have Lamar Odom, who's in a similar position. And now there's a documentary around it where you see him struggling.
Really, I mean, I knew like some about his struggles, but I didn't know like how bad they were. Like, was it that he was like addicted to certain drugs and he got depressed? Like, I haven't watched a documentary and I haven't really followed, like what he had to go through. So could you
Yeah,
just
I
tell us
won't
just a little bit about that?
completely, like, I won't ruin it, but he went through, a couple of really substantial deaths. One of them being his own child. And I mean, and then paired with this feeling of not processing that, not knowing how to, and trying to maintain a persona of being a, you know in our modern dialect, an athlete could be considered some type of warrior archetype, and you don't want to show weakness, or what's perceived as weakness, which is really at this point talking about something like having, like, suffering through, again, like suicidal ideations, your mental health declining. And so you watch him through the course of this documentary, just being like, okay, fine, let's try it. And it's hard to watch someone go through a psychedelic experience because everything that's interesting about it is happening in the mind. But
Hmm.
there's one part of the documentary where he's getting a ketamine infusion. I think it's maybe his second one, and he sits up in the bed and he says, I'm reborn. I'm reborn. And I'm not going to lie, it's kind of hard to watch because it's almost a bit awkward because of how raw it is. But these are the things that people really need to see to be like, okay, that's intimidating. But what were the after effects? And the after effects are that you have this man who's sitting there who looks dramatically different in terms of just clarity in his eyes from the beginning of the documentary to the end, where he says, like, ketamine has changed my life. And what it did was it eradicated this sense of fear. And I actually wrote down one of his quotes because it's simple, but it's poignant. And he says, fear can stop us from trying to be great. Fear can stop us from trying to be great. This is coming out of the mouth of Lamar Odom. What do you mean trying to be great? You're considered one of the greatest, but that just proves that public perception has nothing in comparison to what's going on in someone's mind and how they perceive themselves.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, and there's a couple points I wanted to make there. So first of all, I'm glad you brought up suicidal ideations, and I want to talk about this a little bit. I haven't talked about it before, but I think one thing we need to do in the psychedelic community, and again, some people may say that ketamine is technically an anesthetic, and I know, and MDMA is technically an amphetamine, and I know, but we're kind of grouping these medicines together. But we do need to tease out like which psychedelic may be best for a specific mental health disorder, and it seems like they're all pretty good for all of them for the most part. But I will say that if I had to just pick one for suicidal ideations, I would pick ketamine. From my experience with my patients, it seems that's the one that has the most rapid effect on suicidal ideations. It seems like that's the one that really helps people. And I know, like, we just chatted about Dan Carcillo, and Dan told me, the same thing. He wanted to kill himself, and 2 days later, he did 6 grams of mushrooms in his basement, and that helped out him. So, I'm not saying it has to be ketamine or one or the other, but it seems like that seems to be like the best one overall. And then I do think I agree with you as well, actually. Coming back to, like, athletes kind of like falling from stardom, so to speak. I think Conor McGregor is going through that right now. He's lost a few of his, I think he's lost like 4 of his last 4 fights, something like that. He's not in the top 5 anymore, not even close. I don't even know if he's in the top 10 in his division. And I feel like he's lashing out a lot right now. And I feel like he's definitely afraid to show any type of vulnerability or any type of weakness. And I think his mind right now may in fact be kind of racing and may not be as stable as maybe he kind of makes it out to be. He's just kind of trying to push his persona over and over and over again, and that's why he's doing all these crazy publicity stunts with Machine Gun Kelly and all this stuff. Like, it just seems like it's total nonsense, and he's just trying to attract people. So I think that there's a lot of athletes who do struggle with in their prime being at the top, and then all of a sudden they're no longer on their team, they're retired, and no one kind of cares about them anymore in some regard.
So I spoke with Ian McCall the other day as well, who's an ex what is it, mixed martial artist. What's the top? Sorry, people are gonna get so mad at me for this. UFC. There we go. Sports, everyone. I'm good at them. And so
we'll be fighting in the strawweight division soon for the women.
Who is?
You are.
I am? Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. Come on. We haven't gotten to the point yet where we talk about how much of a lover I am.
We will though. We will.
Okay. So Ian McCall. So ex UFC, known as Uncle Creepy, really tough guy, right? He is now retired, and he is the first psychedelic integration coach for athletes. And one of the things that he's talking about in his McCall method is this dissolution of ego, and how you have athletes who are coming to him, whether they're retired and had a really decorated career, or they're young and they're feisty and they're seeing other young athletes who are getting more sponsorship than them, and yet they've beat them in competitions or whatever. And he's like, what we're dealing with in both cases is ego. And how do we then create a society where you don't have athletes who, once they retire, are devastated because they lose such a sense of themselves? And then how can psychedelics actually help them reconnect to a deeper sense of purpose that doesn't have to do with performing for the masses and getting validation? So I think in terms of psychedelics, and where something like psychedelic assisted therapy or something like ketamine or psilocybin or whatever it may be can be really helpful, is looking at sports and the industry of sports and the fervor of athleticism and like how we put these people on pedestals. So it's really encouraging to me to see so many athletes, Lamar included, coming forward and speaking openly, not only about their use of psychedelics, but why they had to use them in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's the key is why they had to use them in the first place. Because, you know, people want to know, they want to be able to relate to other people. And if it and you don't have, you shouldn't have this attitude all the time, but it should, give you some comfort when you know that someone else is struggling as well. And you definitely don't want to be someone who seeks out attention, seeks out someone sort of like feeling sorry for herself, that type of thing, because that has definitely its own deep pits that can ruin you really. But it is nice to hear, like, when someone like Lamar Odom just genuinely and vulnerably, it comes out and says, like, this is what I'm going through. I was super depressed. I fell from stardom, and this is what I did, and it helped. Then other people who are depressed and who are not doing well are going to think, okay, well, you know what, I'm kind of in the same situation as this guy, as Lamar Odom or whoever it is, and this worked for him, so maybe I should try that myself and get over it. And one other point that I want to make about this too is that a lot of people have a lot of they're very apprehensive about taking psychedelics, and rightly so, right? Because if you've never taken psychedelics before, even some people have never even used alcohol or cannabis before, so they've never had their consciousness altered. It's obviously going to be a little bit frightening, and you're going to be apprehensive. But at the same time, if you're someone who's really depressed, you're not functioning, you're super anxious, you're unwilling to kind of go forward with your life, I mean, you should be more afraid of staying in the same place than of using the psychedelics. I mean, you should be more afraid of continuing to live your life in this depressive and anxious state than using psychedelics. And again, like, these medicines don't last very long. Like, when you use ketamine, like orally, like, you'll probably get dissociated for about 30 to 60 minutes. Maybe it'll be 2 hours if you're like a bit of a slow metabolizer. But like, if you're going through 24 hours of depression every day, it shouldn't be too apprehensive about just being uncomfortable, maybe for about 2 hours or less. And the thing is that most of the time, these people have fantastic experiences with ketamine. So, I know that there's probably some people listening that are, still a little bit apprehensive about, exploring and using these different medicines. But, my message to them is, like, if you are depressed and if you are anxious, you should be more afraid of staying in that state than of actually using the medicine and potentially getting better.
Yeah, and I think, to your point as well, just even in terms of time, maybe I don't know if this is one of your reasons for liking ketamine, but this is kind of again, like a quandary right now in the psychedelics industry, is like, how do we cut down the time of some of these medicines? Again, all to create more access, because if you do, psilocybin with a therapist, you're potentially committed to like a 6-hour day, and
Yeah.
you're the only person that therapist is going to be able to see in the day. Whereas ketamine cuts it down to a couple of hours. MDMA is still a super long commitment as well. So a company Cybin, I don't know if you know much about them, but
I
they,
know Sabin.
yeah, so Cybin has, they actually announced in Wonderland at this conference that they've found a way to cut down psilocybin's onset time. So usually, it can take up to 45 minutes for these things to kick in.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've cut that in half. And they've also cut down how long the trip lasts. So sometimes taking like a 6-hour mushroom trip. And I think they've gotten into into a window of like 2 or 3 hours. Which is great news. And that's
Excellent.
what's really cool about what's happening right now is that we're starting to look at these medicines and we're going like, okay, this is now our constant. Like we know these are working. Let's continue doing the studies, but then let's also see how we can make them more effective as we allow for decriminalization and legalization and all of these other things to take place and all these other industries to form around it. How, when things are ready to finally deploy and we're good to go, you have a short mushroom trip, you have an effective ketamine trip, you have a shorter MDMA trip. So then more people can get access to these. There's better safety protocols put in place so people can do it at home, and physicians or therapists can see more people in a day and hopefully cut down those costs.
Yeah, so I like what you said, because so I want to make a couple comments. So first of all, with regards to you said doing it at home again, and if you talk to most people about psychedelics, they'll say make sure you're out in nature, make sure you're like at a retreat and that type of thing. And I think that has tremendous benefit, and there's a lot of reasons why you should do that. But there also is something about being in the comfort of your own home that makes the experience a little bit easier to handle, right? So like if you're in a foreign place taking a foreign substance, that might be a little bit more intimidating if you're a novice, you haven't used any psychedelics, and say taking a foreign substance in the comfort of your own home. So I think that we should be chatting with people about, you can also do this treatment at home. It doesn't always have to be in a nature type of setting. And then also too, I just wanted to make a quick comment, because I know you did a pretty funny DMT video recently on Chad's channel, I think. I don't know if you posted on yours. I think I saw it on Chad's. But so the reason why I bring up DMT is just because we were just talking about the length of the trip. So DMT, it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. Now it's incredibly powerful. So like when you take DMT, man, you are gone. Like literally within like seconds, like you will have to lie down. You'll have to,
you best be lying down.
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
You don't even know what lying down is after 5 seconds. So
yeah, like you're gone. So like I think that's another psychedelic that we can use for people who, again, are a little bit busy or also too are
well,
a
one
little
of its
bit
nicknames is the businessman's trip.
That's hilarious. I haven't heard that
yet. Yeah, one of its code names is businessman trip, because it's like, oh yeah, you can go on a trip to outer space, catapult through space and time, break through the fabric of reality, and all within your lunch break.
But it's literally true. I mean, I don't recommend that. I think that if you do any type of psychedelic, I think that you should have the rest of that day and the following day off, just to kind of like journal, write down your thoughts, take it all in, and to kind of integrate it. Because that's the part too that bothers me a little bit. I know we chatted about this a while ago with Ronan from Field Trip, is that like if you do it in a clinical setting and then you go back out into the world, it's like all that like good work that you just did, it's so much more difficult than to integrate. Because like when you take these medicines, ideally what you want to do is you want to stay somewhat in that state. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to be that zen or that cool like all the time as much as you were when you're actually on the medicine. But the whole point of it is that you should try to integrate that into your life. And I think that the first day or two are like critically important. Like it can literally like make or break it. Because if you do your trip and then it sinks in that day, it sinks in the next day, and then you're like, okay, I can do this, I can handle this, I can live my life with a different lens, then you can get really good results. But if you are someone just like you're just doing it as like a like part of your day, and then you go back into what you were doing before, you're not going to get that integration component, and you're really just not going to get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, and to that point, you said, okay, well, you're not going to be zen like this all the time, but you now know that being calm like that is possible. And so
It's
holding
possible.
on to that
Yes.
feeling of being like, this is possible for me to experience this for as long as possible, then allows it to be easier to access when you naturally fall into other habits or are triggered. Or you have a busy schedule and you yell at your kids again for not tying their shoes properly. Like, at least you can go, no, 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 there was something that I felt when I was in that calm state. Let me see if I can go dig that back up out of my heart. And the longer you sit with it initially, like you said, the more on the surface it's going to be when you slip back in.
Yeah, and I really, really like what you said though about it gives you that feeling that like it's possible. Because that's what a lot of people like they've just kind of almost like given up on the idea of happiness or given up on the idea that they can feel good. And then these medicines can remind you that you can feel good. And I think that's why a lot of people cry, because they just can't believe that like this is like I can feel this good. They're like, oh my God, I can really feel this good. And then emotion just kind of takes over and they start to cry. So I think that's, part of like the main reason why that happens with a lot of people who use these medicines.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about ketamine as kind of this disassociative anesthetic, and sometimes people hear the word disassociate and there's a negative connotation to it. They almost think of it as like a catatonic state, but what it is, or what it's been explained to me as, is, someone that I know who suffers from depression said that they felt like they were floating above their body. And in that feeling of weightlessness, they felt connected to all things and they felt free from the shackles of their own pain and life experiences and trauma. And so when they came back to their body, they realized where all these like sharp edges were, because they were this light being that was now coming back into a place that felt really tight and constricted. But now that gave them a frame of reference to work away from that to maintaining that state of lightness without needing the medicine. But now they kind of knew the difference because they felt both. And he cried during that trip, I think, for the reasons that you're outlining. Like, you are in a sense freed from yourself momentarily, and it just feels like such a relief in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's exactly why people have like emotional reactions when they use these medicines. It's just because they're not used to, like, it sounds strange to say, but they're literally uncomfortable with the feeling of happiness. And then when that feeling comes up, it's like when you're on these medicines, you almost like have to feel happy, like it like forces you in some way. And because of that, the tears come out. But I was going to ask you quickly. I know you have to go. You only have a few minutes left. But what are sort of like the best integration practices that people can have for trying to stay in that psychedelic space without the use of the medicines?
Well, I mean, like, just the word that you use there, space, right? And I think that's
Yeah,
what it is we're so almost compulsively obsessive with filling space with things. I know I certainly feel uncomfortable sometimes, if I'm in almost kind of like a manic state, if I get to the end of my to-do list, because it feels like I've reached the end of a plank. It's like,
yeah,
oh, what, I'm going to fall down into not having a to-do list and not knowing what I'm going to do. But that's exactly it, is when you create space, you have no idea what's going to fill it. So part of these psychedelic experiences is the need to just create space without expectation. And so, yes, I can say you should, journal, and you should eat healthy, and you should go into a float tank. And those are great. Book a massage. The best thing to do is to create space for you to simply listen and hear exactly what it is that your body wants you to do next.
yeah. I completely agree, and I like to spend quite a bit of time alone, like especially in the morning. I need at least 20 or 30 minutes, like completely by myself. Like I don't want anyone else in the room. I just want to be in a room by myself, and that's where I do meditation, and I usually have a daily book on the go. So I was reading the Daily Stoic for about 5 years, but Robert Greene, who I think you're pretty familiar with. He came out
The
with
book
a
is
new,
literally right behind me.
Are
Yeah.
you seriously?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. So Robert Greene, came out with a new book called The Daily Law. So that's been my daily book recently. And then I use the Headspace app. It's just 10 minutes, 10 minutes or 12 minutes a day. There's a bunch of other ones out there. A lot of people have a lot of good things to say about Sam Harris's app, Waking Up.
Yep.
Calm is another one. But so what in the morning I try to do the daily laws, and then I also do journaling, and then and the Headspace app. And there's some days where I literally just put on meditation music and just do nothing but think and sit for 20 or 30 minutes. And it's like, what is that doing for you? It's doing a lot. Like, it does a lot for me, So I think, making sure you have time for yourself is very, very, very important. And don't let anyone tell you that you're being selfish because you need time for yourself. I think
And
a
don't
little
feel
bit of time,
guilty. That's the other
don't
thing,
feel
right?
guilty.
It's one thing for people to tell you that you're being selfish or to imply this, and that's really up to you to set boundaries, which can be difficult. But it's, yes, you can create this space, but if you're sitting in that space and you're ruminating on all of the things that you should be doing rather than taking that time to yourself, that's wasted time. That is truly wasted time, because you're neither here nor there. You're neither doing a thing nor completely surrendering to relaxing. You're kind of in this weird floaty state, right? Where like creating that space is doing whatever you want to do, and also objectively looking at the patterns that you have to that are tempting to call you back in. So by creating that space, do you get nervous and all of a sudden want to check your phone 100 times? Well, now just be aware that that's the thing that you naturally gravitate towards doing when you do give yourself the space, and then lovingly talk yourself down from that social media edge and sit with it.
Yeah, it basically helps you identify, poor habits that you have.
Yeah.
Which is really important. But I'd love to chat with you for a lot longer, but I know that you have a real hard stop at 2:00.
Well, I have to go interview Lamar and tell him that you think he's only the third best player ever. So on the Lakers.
let me know what he says about that. He might even be the fourth if you include Derek Fisher. No, he's probably third. Anyway, so Cole, tell everyone where they can find you online and all your different services that you offer, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, I would say follow me on Instagram or Twitter. The handle for both of those are at Nicolle double L. It's Nicolle, the word double, and then another L. And that will lead you to things like Girls Who Say Fuck, which is a female empowerment brand, and workshops that I run on the art of dominance and submission. The Orgasm book, it's a Dr. Seussian style book about the power of pleasure called Oh, the Places You'll Go, Oh. The Dales Report, where I talk a lot about psychedelics and crypto. And then Men Who Take Baths, where I put men in bubble baths and I interview them about what it means to be a man. I think that's it.
It's a lot of shit that people can look up. So I'm sure they'll be busy until you come back on next time. But we didn't get through everything that I want to chat about today. So
I know we didn't talk about sex and psychedelics. So that's a to be continued, everyone. Part 2 coming soon.
Okay, so I'm asking you right now on air. You have to come back on the show within a month. We have to do it for at least an hour or more.
Deal.
Okay, done.
Okay.
Bye. Thanks so much for coming on, Nicolle. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. See ya.